Welcome to the International Newsnet World Report. I am your host, Mizan Kirby-Nooms. Today in the news, the Bush administration told Iran that any enrichment of nuclear fuel on Iranian territory was unacceptable. At least 5 people have been killed after twin explosions in the northern Indian pilgrimage town of Varanasi. On Arab television, a new video showing 3 of the 4 hostage Christian peacemaker activists was broadcast. The Senate immigration bill will enable illegal immigrants now in the United States to remain if they stay employed, but will not lead to citizenship. FBI agent Michael Antisev testified at the sentencing of Zacarias Moussaoui that by the 1990s, the U.S. government knew how al-Qaeda trained suicide operatives but missed capturing the alleged mastermind of the September 11th attacks. U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld said that at a news conference, Iranian forces have been infiltrating Iraq and that they are currently putting people into Iraq to do things that are harmful to the future of Iraq, unquote. One of the pioneers of Mali blues, Alifa Touré, has died after a long illness in his home country of Mali. He was one of Africa's best-known musicians. We also have an interview with Dan Krause about his film on the death of Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer Kevin Carter and more. And now, the news the networks won't tell you. Stay tuned. Now for the international news. In Iraq, in the city of Basra, 2 men were burned to death in their car after a shootout with Iraqi police. Security officials said the victims were British citizens. A third person in the car, also believed to be a British citizen, was wounded and rushed away by police. 2 Iraqi policemen and 2 civilians also were wounded in the shooting. Elsewhere in Iraq, a car bomb in Bakuba killed 6 people, including 2 children. 5 car bombs exploded in the capital, killing 3 police and injuring 24 people. The website Uruknet reports that the importance of United Arab Emirates as a staging area for future hostilities in the Middle East cannot be overstated. Uruknet goes on to say the UAE port deal is just more indication that an attack on Iran is forthcoming. Its location is crucial to the success of any American invasion. No military strategy can hope to succeed without first establishing a beachhead across the straits in Iran. Reporter Mike Whitney suggests that plans for an attack on Iran may be on track for late March as originally threatened by Israel. The United States is currently pushing to have the Security Council censure Iran. Protests against the administration of President General Pervez Musharraf and the U.S. began in Pakistan about a month ago at the rallies denouncing caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad. These protests have now reached the stronghold of al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Pakistan, the self-proclaimed Islamic State of North Waziristan on the border with Afghanistan. This region is now the scene of fierce battles between the Pakistani armed forces and the Taliban. Analysts believe this is the starting point of taking the movement to enforce the Prophet Muhammad's way of life or Sharia law on society to the rest of Pakistan. The International Atomic Energy Agency is holding talks in Vienna concerning UN Security Council action against Iran. As a way of building trust, Iran's President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad suggested the West should compensate Iran for its past suspension of nuclear research for causing damage to the development of its science, technology, and economy. A senior military commander warned on Monday that the Iranian military would turn the country into a killing field for any enemy aggressor. Western countries were alarmed last night that Russia was ready to break ranks and agree to Iran's demand to continue nuclear research and development. Tehran insists it has the right to develop its nuclear sector to produce energy for civilian purposes, but the IAEA and the U.S. say only a full suspension is acceptable. According to the website Infowars.net, a recent statistical report based on data from the Defense Department has found that fewer than half of the 517 detainees held in Guantanamo prison have been accused of any hostile acts. The report revealed the world's most dangerous terrorists are poor farmers, a former market delivery driver, a student with a Quran, and the like, who have been grabbed and stuck in cages. A U.S. Army official visiting Camp Delta was quoted in 2002 as saying there are, quote, no big fish there. Some of these guys literally don't know the world is round, unquote. 89% of U.S., British, and Asian corporate technology decision makers plan to increase their outsourcing budget over the next 12 months. A survey conducted at the Patney Computer Systems annual conference found that 39% said they expect to increase outsourced spending by 20% over current spending, while 11% plan a 50% or more increase.
The message said to be is free.
The International Newsnet. News the networks won't tell you. Now for the national news. Treasury Secretary John Snow notified Congress on Monday that the administration has now taken all prudent and legal actions, including tapping certain government retirement funds. This is being done to keep from hitting the $8.2 trillion national debt limit. In a letter to Congress, Snow urged lawmakers to pass a new debt ceiling immediately to avoid the first ever U.S. default on its obligations. Snow notified lawmakers that the Treasury would begin tapping the Civil Service Retirement and Disability Fund, which Treasury officials said would provide a few $billion in extra borrowing ability. Treasury has also been taking investments out of a $65.3 billion government pension fund known as the G Fund, which is part of the Federal Employees Retirement System. A federal judge has refused to allow a lengthy delay in the sentencing of lobbyist Jack Abramoff. Lawyers for both sides said the move could jeopardize a federal corruption investigation involving Congress and the Bush administration. Abramoff attorney Abe Lowell warned that the defense would name names, which is not a good thing for law enforcement. The judge agreed to delay sentencing from March 16th to March 29th, but he rejected a joint motion by federal prosecutors and attorneys to hold off for at least 90 days. Alberto Gonzalez spoke before law students at Georgetown Law School, justifying illegal, unauthorized surveillance of U.S. citizens. But during the course of his speech, the students in class did something pretty gutsy and brave. They got up from their seats and turned their backs to him. Fortunately for him, it was a brief speech, followed by a panel discussion that appeared to rip his argument in half. RawStory.com reports a British security firm headquartered in Dubai has won lucrative contracts for U.S. security in Iraq and the United States, providing security in the wake of Hurricane Katrina and training Iraqi port security officers under the Coalition Provisional Authority. The firm, the Olive Group, is largely comprised of ex-British intelligence officers. While it is a British company, its main headquarters are in Dubai. The revelation that a Dubai-based firm provides security consulting for myriad U.S. operations at home and abroad shows the increasing tendency of the U.S. government to privatize security efforts. Another of the men that was named by the FBI as a hijacker on September 11th has turned up alive and well. The identities of 4 of the 19 suspects accused of having carried out the attacks are now in doubt. Saudi Arabian pilot Walid al-Sheri was one of the 5 men that the FBI said had deliberately crashed American Airlines Flight 11 into the World Trade Center. Al-Sheri is protesting his innocence from Casablanca, Morocco, and says he was in Morocco when the attacks happened. Abdulaziz Al-Omari, another of the Flight 11 hijacked suspects, claims to be an engineer with Saudi Telecoms and that he lost his passport while studying in Denver. Meanwhile, Ashaq Al-Awsat newspaper says it has interviewed Saeed Al-Ghamidi, who was listed to have been on Flight 93. According to the Transportation Department, deaths from crashes involving large trucks on U.S. roads could hit a 6-year high. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has been under fire on 2 fronts in recent weeks. Consumer and safety groups have sued a second time to stop rules on trucker hours and fatigue prevention, saying the Bush administration is shortchanging driver health. There are more than 5,000 people killed and 100,000 injured in truck-related crashes each year. I am Mizan Kirby Noons. You are watching INN World Report on Free Speech TV. Our website is INNWorldReport.net. If you've got a hot tip or a story we might be interested in, call us at the studio 646-613-8223 or email us at INNWorldReport@gmail.com. Next up, INN's Jim Dingman talked with Dan Krause, director of the Academy Award nominee documentary short, The Death of Kevin Carter. The film will be shown on HBO later in the year and is currently screening around the U.S.
We're joined with Dan Krause, who's the director of The Death of Kevin Carter, an Academy Award nominee. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
Dan, first of all, tell us who Kevin Carter is and how did you get interested in this topic?
Well, Kevin Carter was a white South African photojournalist who spent most of his career covering the decline of apartheid, which was accompanied by a great deal of violence. But he's most well known for a very famous photograph he took in southern Sudan of a starving Sudanese girl with a vulture looming behind her. And Kevin was a man who was, tormented by the idea of having to make a decision whether it is better to document or to intervene in scenes of suffering that he witnessed. I first became aware of Kevin's story as a young photojournalist about 10 years ago, and I knew only the bare bones outline of his story, that he had taken this famous photo and that he had then soon after taken his own life. And so I was initially drawn to the mystery of why, after having achieved the highest recognition of his work, would he so soon thereafter take his own life. But what I found was the story was much larger than just a simple mystery, that there was a parable, a moral drama that was much more interesting and involved.
Well, and I quote what he writes, the pain of life overrides the joy of the point that joy does not exist. That was his suicide note. And just explain, how does somebody who 2 months after getting the Pulitzer Prize decides to kill himself for all sorts of reasons. Tell us a little bit about his youth, how he grew up, and how he reacted to apartheid in South Africa.
Yeah, he grew up in a white Catholic family in the suburbs of South Africa, and I think he had what you would describe as a pretty normal upbringing in that part of the world. But normal in South Africa has a different meaning than normal for us here in the U.S. because it was a sharply divided country, of course. And Kevin, like many people in this generation, grew up questioning the appropriateness of apartheid, and did it quite vocally. And later on in his life, he was actually conscripted into the military like everyone else of his age, and he deserted. He deserted, right? He left after working only a short time, as a member of the army and having to patrol the townships and enforce the apartheid regime, and he couldn't take it, so he left.
Right, and he comes into the army at the time of the Soweto uprisings in the late 70s. Now, how did he become a photographer?
Well, he started just as a weekend sports photographer at a local paper. It was probably more of a hobby than anything else at that point, but he quickly realized that the camera was a very powerful tool, and it became his mode of speaking in a way, his mode of speaking against apartheid, especially when the violence really erupted in the townships. Kevin was really honing his skills as a photographer on the weekends, and when he had the opportunity to cover these major news stories, he jumped at it.
Now tell us what the Bang Bang Club is. Who came up?
Bang Bang Club was a group of 4 white South African photographers. Kevin was one of them, and they patrolled the townships together. They banded together out of for reasons of safety, also camaraderie, and also so they could keep each other apprised of all the breaking news, and so they helped each other out. It was a cooperative and it was a cooperative arrangement, but it was also sort of a fraternity, brothers under fire. And so they were very close, and they were very talented, and they were very brazen. They were not afraid to get in very close to extreme violence and use, beat up wide-angle lenses, and they were very much the image of 70s rock stars. They had sort of long hair, and they smoked lots of cigarettes. They wore a lot of jewelry. They were sort of like Dennis Hopper in Apocalypse Now. They were, sort of rock and roll photographers, and South Africa had never seen anything like that before.
And they smoked lots of meth and amphetamine and marijuana.
Yeah, that was part of their coping mechanism, because they were stepping between very hot and cold water. I mean, at one moment they would be witnessing this extreme violence in the townships, and the next moment they would be back in complete safety in suburbia. So it was very difficult for them mentally to cope between those two worlds and experiencing them in such quick succession day after day. And part of the way that they dealt with that was to drink and drug a lot.
Right. Well, and that sounds very much like a reaction to post-traumatic stress disorder,
yes.
or in my day they used to call it the post-Vietnam syndrome. Now, one of them won the Pulitzer Prize in 1990. Marinovich?
Yes, Greg Marinovich.
And that was a famous picture of a Zulu killed during the ANC and Kata fighting that was going on. And then in 93, Carter wins the Pulitzer, or goes to Sudan and then wins the Pulitzer in 94. Right. Now explain a little bit about that photograph, because that's a haunting, powerful photograph.
Yes, it had a huge impact. He took it in 93 on a trip to Sudan, southern Sudan, a village named Ayad, and it was a village that was under the eye of the humanitarian effort there, and he was near a feeding station, and he wandered away from the main activity of the feeding station and happened upon the sight of a child sort of hunched over in the dust. and a vulture stepped into the frame as he was composing a photograph, and he spent quite some time composing this picture and realizing that there was a huge symbolism in this very simple juxtaposition of the vulture and the child. And when the picture was published in the New York Times a short time later, there was a huge response. There was a flood of phone calls and letters from people wondering what had happened to the child.
Well, do we know what happened to the child?
No, there's no answer. I mean, the story is that Kevin made the photograph, chased away the vulture, and sat down under a tree and broke down. He cried. And the question that haunted him afterwards was, why didn't he pick up the child and do something to help her? But, there's a huge contextual piece of information that's missing from that photograph, because people looked at that photograph and they saw all of Africa encapsulated in the borders of that frame between the vulture and the child, but they didn't understand that there were lots of starving children all around Kevin. There were lots of vultures, and there was this feeding station not far away, within walking distance. So the criticism that was leveled at him was perhaps unfair, perhaps it was reasonable. I mean, I don't think there is an absolute answer to that question. I personally can't condemn Kevin for his behavior. I think it was a very difficult situation that he was experiencing. It was something that he didn't cause, and it was something that he couldn't solve himself. And I think you can make an argument that picture did a lot to bring humanitarian attention to that region of the world when it was at that time mostly ignored.
Right, and there was, if I recall, there was a famous Kenyan photographer or journalist who came up there along with the Bang Bang Club, if you will, to cover it, and that was basically what broke the story open. Now, I'm struck with how pained he was over the anguish he had seen and the sorrow. And he writes, "I am haunted by the vivid memories of killings and corpses and anger and pain, of starving or wounded children, of trigger-happy madmen, often police, of killer executioners." The distance that one has from these stories, sometimes people talk about how these things repeat themselves and one becomes numb watching them, let alone experiencing them, when one has to truly maintain one's sanity in the midst of this. That's the kind of dilemmas that has been posed by that picture and the implications of it. Where do you come out on this?
Well, I think what it comes down to is actually having discipline as a journalist, and keeping your eye on the big picture, no pun intended, but the idea of understanding that your reporting as a journalist may be able to change public policy, may bring an awareness that can help a huge number of people. And Kevin believed in that, and I think what he had a hard time doing was maintaining the discipline of that attitude when faced with these scenes of horrible suffering, because the human part of him, for lack of a better word, was screaming inside to not take the photograph, to act as any human would act. And the discipline of the journalist is to really do both. Of course, there is a time when a journalist must intervene if it will make an immediate difference, and there are times when a journalist must realize that their work can actually do more to benefit people than a single act of intervention would do. And so it's a very difficult situation. I don't think there's ever an easy answer. There's no steadfast rule about when it's okay to, as a journalist, to cross that line between being a documentarian and being a quote unquote a concerned citizen. And it's a dilemma that haunts journalists even today in places like Iraq and Afghanistan.
Now, where will the film be airing?
Well, it'll be on the HBO Cinemax network starting in August, so you can catch it on television there. It's also showing at a number of screenings. It's touring with the other nominated short documentaries, and in fact, it'll be in New York later this month for a week. I think it's Cinema Village in New York City.
And where is the website for the film?
It's www.kevincarterfilm.com.
Well, we want to thank the director of The Death of Kevin Carter, Dan Krause, for joining us. A very powerful look at a very powerful subject. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
It was one of the last good tales of good and evil. Most of us in the press corps were in our 30s and very, very, shall we say, politically and morally wrapped up with this tale. You were living, watching history as it happened. You were watching the final years of apartheid.
There was an awful lot of violence in the townships and in the rural areas perceived to be black on black violence. But there was a suspicion of involvement by the government of the time. Those are the death rattles of a government that's moving out of existence.
We're talking about people using axes. We're talking about people using machetes. We're talking about point-blank massacres and executions. We're talking about people burning tires around somebody else's neck and burning them to death. So it was very, very barbaric, low-level killings.
It wasn't easy, for a black photographer to cover. What you cover in the township, you cover exactly your brothers and sisters.
So you have this pocket of chaos in a township, which was mind-blowing in terms of the violence, and then suddenly you would, by 9-10 a.m., be back eating croissants at a bakery in Melville. It was bizarre, and then by midday you'd be filing your pictures. See, so it was a very weird kind of situation. It was extreme violence married to this kind of marshmallowy existence in suburbia.
I left them crying. I left them messed up in the township, the house of burning, and lunchtime come to sit with the white folks, and then we eat. I feel bad. That's where now I says no, and I feel like I'm betraying them.
Let me tell you the story about the Bang Bang Club. Bang Bang was the term that the photographers were using in those days for going out into the townships to cover the conflict. It was just these four guys that were doing exceptional work. And the world was starting to see their work, and it was getting good play all around the place. Time Magazine, New York Times, LA Times, all over the world. Photographers used to call me from outlying cities. They'd phone up and say, "Where can we join the Bang Bang Club?"
They were white guys that could go into incredibly explosive situations, and you knew that if you went into them, they would get you out, because they had done what was the impossible, which is they had gained the trust of people who hated people like them.
He was this, wonderful, tough, great, sexy township photographer. Gorgeous, with ladies falling all over the place, believe you me. They used to look at me with envy.
There was this crazy man.
9, and we'll see you again tomorrow.